what's your approach to figuring out values? Like, this is something that I've been sort of trying to research in depth because I'm working on a book about meaningful productivity, and part of the equation is figuring out what direction that we're going to go in. And something people say is that if you figure out your values, then that gives you a pretty good first approximation for what are the things you value, therefore what are the things you should be doing with your life. And I've come across all these different ways of doing it, like value lists and stuff, but I'm curious, like, what's your approach to figuring, like, how would you actually define a value? Like, what the hell is a value? And how would you go about, like, finding what your own values are?
Yeah, these are good questions. So I'll start with the disclaimer of, like, I don't think that they're like our objective values. I think they are kind of like nebulous, subjective things floating around in your head and this sort of thing. So there's not really right or wrong values. There are values that are like very different from other people's or this sort of thing. But yeah, for me, when I think about, say, a value versus like a preference, it's something that you kind of like want perpetuated. So if you say, like, I value chocolate ice cream, that would mean you, like, want other people to eat chocolate ice cream. You want more chocolate ice cream to exist in the world. If you say, like, I have a preference for chocolate ice cream, I might not care if you eat vanilla ice cream or whatever else. It's kind of there. So that's where some of the distinction goes. And then I think most of the time what people are talking about with values is they're talking about high-level values, like these kind of like primary, fundamental things. They're not talking about kind of like means values. So, maybe I value being healthy on kind of a high level, and that means I should brush my teeth. But I don't value brushing my teeth. It is like a kind of a method to get that kind of higher level maximization of your value. Another thing that I think is very interesting that I'll touch on briefly is I think values change way more than people give them credit for. So I think people imagine that these are kind of like very fixed elements that are kind of like core to them. But I think if you actually look at what it seems like people value in terms of kind of their actions and that sort of thing, it changes quite a lot over people's lives. It can be modified by experience and this sort of thing. So I think there may be like a bit less fixed pillar than people expect. That being said, there probably is some convergence. Like, probably if you got 100 people in a room to think about their values a lot, they would probably come to certain conclusions more often than other conclusions. They might move higher up on that kind of spectrum, like more I value health, less I value brushing my teeth sort of outcomes.
Do your spreadsheets account for potential future value changes? Because presumably you're evaluating things based on your current set of values. And if there is some unknown future set of values which you might then shift towards, then maybe you should change what you're doing today, right?
Yeah, value drift. It's a huge concern. Current me really likes current me's values and does not want future me to have radically different values. Values are self-preserving. They care about themselves being there. So if I could take a pill and know that I would no longer care about people or altruism, interestingly, of course, I wouldn't care about having taken the pill after I take it. But right now, with my current values, I would say, no, I do not want that pill. And the pill doesn't have to be as dramatic as a pill. It could be anything, right? That's going to affect your values. So yeah, I definitely worry about value drift. If I was to, say, win the lottery and win $50 million, let's say, maybe right now, I would think, oh yeah, I want to donate the bulk of that. But I would probably set up a system to make sure that actually happens. So like maybe put it in a donor advised fund or donate it to a charity that then regrants or something like that, because I don't really trust 10 years from now, Joey. That guy could be cool. He could be bad. Who knows? Yeah. People change a lot more than they expect to. You always think you're at your final self, and you're really not. So if you are worried that your next final self won't be quite as, say, altruistic as your current self, then you do want to plan around that.
Well, how do you go about figuring out your values?
Oh boy. I mean, a lot of talking to people, a lot of introspection, a lot of that sort of thing. I think sometimes you know kind of things like nebulously floating around. For me, I spent a lot of time thinking about weightings of values, actually, because I kind of like knew that I had some of these like primary values, but it was much trickier thinking like, how much do I value A versus B? So I have a system what I call the 3H system. So these are like my top 3 fundamental values. And this is helpfulness, happiness, and health. And there's kind of an interesting story for each of them. Happiness and helpfulness are, I think, like quite self-evident. A lot of people have these values to some extent. They want to help other people, be altruistic, and they want to kind of be intrinsically happy. But those can break down in all sorts of interesting ways. Like, by happiness, do you mean life satisfaction happiness, or do you mean moment-to-moment hedonic happiness? Those are very different optimization paths. And when I think about, say, helpfulness versus happiness, how much do I value that? Do I actually fundamentally value health, or is health actually just a proxy to get health and happiness again? So I think what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of get this all down into like one page. I wanted to get down like what are my fundamental values and what are kind of like my sub values in those values, so that I can kind of like look over them and modify them. And it's a changing page. It's it's a Google Doc. I modify things and that sort of thing. But the higher level stuff sticks, and I have ratios. So for me, each value is one order of magnitude less important than the value before it. So helpfulness is like 90% of my time, energy, focus, etc. Happiness is like 9%, and health is like 0.9%, and then that other 0.1% is pancakes or whatever else kind of doesn't fall into one of those modifiers.
Interesting. Because so when I do these kind of value exercises, one thing that often comes out for me is this. Like, I very highly value autonomy slash freedom, which has played out in my life in sort of my biggest fear being shackled to a job that I might potentially not enjoy, for example. But then I think, well, how much do I actually value autonomy and freedom? And it's sort of, if integrity and honesty is on the list of values, but like intuitively I know that I really value autonomy and freedom, but like, would I don't know, be dishonest for the sake of autonomy and freedom? It's like probably not. But does that mean that I value honesty and integrity more than freedom? But maybe. But like that feels to not really sit right with me. Where if I think about what's the primary thing I'm always optimizing for, it's always autonomy and freedom. So
Yeah.
any thoughts on that issue?
So there's probably like curves that matter. So if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or whatever, you have to like fulfill these survival values before moving up to the next thing. And I think there might be like minimum thresholds for some values that don't continue scaling up. So let's say my health value, only like 1% of my time and energy. But if I was like extremely unhealthy, like extremely sick or something like that, that value of course would get a lot higher. How it's kind of ranked in its context is based on how easy it is to kind of like maximize or satisfy or this sort of thing. Part of why health only gets like 1% of my energy is because I actually think it's quite easy. I think it's a lot easier for me to be healthy than it is for me to be happy, for example. I think that's just like a much more challenging problem. So I think that kind of comes to it. So maybe the part of integrity that you value is actually like quite easily achieved. And if you kind of like create theoretical situations where you really have to like trade it off and you're kind of like below that threshold, then it's there. One interesting thing with values.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just saying, that's interesting. Haven't thought of it in that way before. Go on.
I think some people have maximization values for some things and satisfying values for other things, and that also can make it quite messy. So maybe for integrity, you don't need to like maximize. Like you don't want to be like the most integrity focused person ever, but you have this like minimum threshold. Like you want to be X level of integrity, and once that's satisfied, you're kind of like indifferent. My values, for instance, happiness and health are both satisfying goals. There is a level of both, which I'm just like, cool. I don't want to be the healthiest person in the world. I don't want to be the happiest person in the world. I kind of want to be an 8 out of 10 on both, and that's like good. Like once I pass that, good enough. Where helpfulness, so like saving other people's lives and doing altruism, that's a maximization goal. I don't really have a number of which I'd be like, I'm happy with that. It's kind of like the infinite ambition that you have.
What's the point of writing these things down and ranking them and so on? I mean, it sounds like there's some fuzzy, nebulous internal process in your head, which consists of your values, and that's how you evaluate things. Once you've written it down, like what changes?
Well, one thing is you live by them more.
Okay.
So health, for example, got added because I figured that I would not prioritize it. It tends to be the thing that's forgotten. And as funny as it sounds, even putting it down as a 1% value has made me think like, oh, this is something I intrinsically care about. I do want to maximize longevity and this sort of thing. And I am healthier than I was before I had it as kind of a value in my mind or a designated thing. So I think that's one thing. I think your actions end up corresponding to your specified values. It also helps you kind of like break down, if you're kind of imagining it as like a tree, like your top level value, you can kind of break it down further. So in my 1-page document, I have like, for health, for example, I break that down to like 3 subcategories of like physical health, mental health, and habits. And then I have 3 like pillars of each of those that I think if I do well on, I'm probably going to success on that category. So for physical health, if I sleep 8+ high quality hours, if I eat food not too much, mostly plants, and for exercise, if I use my feet to get to work and exercise 10 minutes of hard workout a day, that will probably maximize my kind of physical health goal. So you can kind of like break these down, and actually right below my values, I have like what my morning routine is or my day routine. And that is very closely corresponding to these kind of like ultimate values that I want. And it's very motivational to be able to go like, okay, yeah, I'm doing this 10-minute workout, not because I want to do a 10-minute workout today, but because it kind of fits into this overarching set of goals that I want to succeed on.
So then the values list, is it really more of an aspirational values list in that you then change your behavior to match that rather than these are my existing values, you know?
I think it's most useful to start with your existing values, but then think about where you do want to put time and attention and focus on kind of like making certain values better. So again, I think they're more moldable than you think. So I think a lot of people, yeah, will think that like, you know, I really care about hedonic happiness, don't care about life satisfaction. But then as they get older, they tend to care a lot more about life satisfaction and a lot less about hedonic happiness. And it's like, huh, that's interesting. And I actually think you can do this deliberately too. Like you can be like, I want to value health. Like that's an example. I'm going to put it on my chart. I'm going to integrate it. And now I really do think it is an intrinsic value at about 1% weight. Like it really has kind of integrated with my mindset. Kind of like if you hear something said 10 times, if you hear that health is part of your values and you identify as I'm a person who cares about health, it kind of like gains a weight or prominence in your morals, your actions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I've definitely found that as well. Like, especially in the health example, where in the past I just sort of had this vague thing of, oh yeah, I guess I kind of want to be healthy. But then it was only like last year where I actually wrote down that, you know, health is something that I value, probably, you know, above most other things. That without health there is no there's effectively no happiness, without good health, my happiness will likely be severely limited. Therefore, I should take care of my health more. I guess like before hearing you describe it as like maximizing versus satisficing, I just hadn't quite, because, for example, a few months ago, I signed up with a personal trainer and I said, okay, I want to get 6-pack abs at some point this year. It's a fun goal to work towards. And then like every week he'd be like, you know, how's your nutrition going? And I'd be like, well, I got a takeaway last night. He's like, okay. And have you been counting your calories? And it took a few months of this, a few weeks and months of this for me to realize that actually I don't care about getting 6-pack abs. I care about being healthy enough. And healthy enough is the current state where I'm at. And yes, I would like my biceps to be a little bit bigger because, you know, dating. But beyond that, I actually don't care about the 6-pack abs. And that was enormously freeing. I was like, great. That means if I do the thing of eat food, mostly plants, not very much, and maybe, you know, skip breakfast each day, #intermittent fasting, then it doesn't really matter if I get a takeaway every night, provided I fulfill, you know, roughly these parameters of mostly going grilled meats rather than fried meats, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And now I feel like, damn, this is just so much more liberating, because I don't have to be counting calories because I've actively decided that this is not something I value.
That's actually a big thing that I think is another benefit of kind of like specifying it out. I think people have all these values, but they don't realize the trade-offs, right? So yes, I want 6-pack abs, but do I want to have 6-pack abs enough for the trade-offs in like tasty food? If the answer is no, let go of one of those goals. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly frustrated, where you're kind of like, oh, I really wish I had 6-pack abs, but I'm not going to do it because I like this food. When you kind of like figure out, okay, how do my values conflicts? How do I resolve those conflicts? It is nice because you can just drop stuff. Like, would I like to be, like, I was a very fast runner as a kid. Would I like to be a super fast runner as an adult? Sure. Would I like to be a super fast runner enough to prioritize it above a million other things in my life? No. So there we go. It's gone. It's you know, it's a goal that I would certainly love if I could snap my fingers and have it. But it's not a goal that I am willing to kind of trade off the time and energy that it would take to kind of make that happen.